You see a handsome bottle, an age printed on the label, and a price that feels like it was earned out in the Scottish hills. That is the surface. Underneath it sits a different story, made of legal loopholes, fake casks, dead distilleries, and bottles worth millions that turn out to be coloured water. This is the Scotch Whisky Iceberg, and we are going to the bottom. The further down we go, the stranger it gets, and by the end, you will never look at the bottle on your shelf the same way again. Let us start at the top, where the water is calm and everyone feels comfortable. This is the Scotch most people already recognise. There is single malt made at one distillery from malted barley, and there is blended Scotch, which mixes malt with cheaper grain whisky. Blends are not the poor relation either. They are the overwhelming majority of what the world actually drinks, somewhere around 9 bottles out of every 10. You learn the famous names early: Glenlivet and Glenfiddich, the two giants that built the modern single malt category and still outsell almost everyone. Macallan, the luxury badge that collectors chase. Johnnie Walker, the blend that conquered the entire planet one bar at a time. You learn there are regions too: the rugged highlands, the gentle lowlands, Speyside with its honeyed orchard flavours, the old seafaring town of Campbelltown, and one small, windswept island off the west coast whose name nobody can pronounce, famous for whiskey that tastes like a beach bonfire. You learn that the smoke comes from peat, that age is supposed to matter, and that a darker, older bottle is meant to be a better one. That is the postcard. It is mostly true, and it is also the shallowest possible version of the truth, because every one of those comfortable assumptions has something hiding underneath it, and we are about to lift them up one at a time. Take that first dip below the waterline. Single malt does not mean what most newcomers assume. People hear the word single and picture one special barrel, one perfect moment captured in glass. In reality, single malt only means the whiskey came from one distillery. A standard bottle of Glenlivet 12-year-old is married together from hundreds of separate casks, blended by a master to taste identical year after year. The word single is doing far less work than the marketing implies. The age statement hides a quiet secret of its own. When a label says 12 years old, that is the age of the youngest whiskey in the bottle, not the average. There can be much older spirit in there too, but the number you pay for is the floor, never the ceiling. And a famous blend like Johnnie Walker is a different animal entirely, a recipe of dozens of malts and grain whiskies stitched together. That grain whiskey is made in towering column stills that run almost like a factory, producing clean, cheap, near neutral spirit by the tanker load. It is the silent backbone of nearly every famous blend on earth, and almost nobody ever mentions it. Here is the part that genuinely surprises people. Most of the flavour in your Scotch did not come from Scotland at all. It came from America. Scotch is almost always aged in second-hand barrels, and the most common barrel by a mile is an old bourbon cask shipped over from Kentucky. There is a simple reason for that. By law, American bourbon must be aged in brand new charred oak, so every distillery there is left with a flood of perfectly good barrels they can only use once. Scotland buys them by the millions. The wood that shaped your Highland single malt spent its first life holding whiskey in a warehouse halfway across the world. The romance of the misty glen is real, but the cask doing most of the heavy lifting was an immigrant. As much as 70% of the final flavour of a whiskey is said to come from the wood rather than the distillery, which means the barrel often matters more than the name on the label. Even the smoke is a manufacturing choice. Peat is just compressed bog, dug up and burned underneath the wet barley to dry it, and the smoke soaks into the grain before fermentation ever begins. The smokier the bottle, the longer the maltster held it over that fire. It is not magic drifting in off the sea, it is a measured, deliberate dose, dialed up or down depending on what the distillery wants to sell you. And older is not automatically better either, whatever the price tag suggests. Whiskey only matures in the barrel, never in the bottle, so a dusty 30-year-old that has sat on a shelf for a decade is exactly the same liquid it was. the day it was sealed. Worse, leave spirit in an aggressive cask too long and it turns woody, bitter, and dried out, all oak and no fruit. Plenty of older bottles are coasting purely on the size of the number, not the quality of the dram inside. Now we go deeper into the layer where the marketing quietly starts working against you. Look closely at the colour of your whiskey because it is very often a lie. Scotch is legally allowed to contain one single additive and nothing else. It is called spirit caramel, known by the code E150A, and it is essentially burnt sugar used purely to darken the liquid. The official reason is consistency, so every batch looks the same on the shelf. The unofficial reason is that darker whiskey reads as older and richer, and a deeper colour quietly sells more bottles. The majority of single malts and almost every blend on the market are coloured this way. And here is the uncomfortable bit. Producers do not have to tell you. There is no requirement to print it on the label anywhere in Britain. The only country that forces disclosure is Germany, where the law makes brands write the words for added colour right there on the back. So if you ever want to know whether your favourite bottle is dyed, look up its German label. The honest distilleries already advertise it, printing natural colour on the front as a badge of pride. The whole thing reached its absurd conclusion with a bottle called Loch Dew, made at the Mannockmore distillery in the late 1990s. Marketed as the black whiskey, it was so heavily loaded with caramel colouring that it came out almost jet black in the glass. It tasted, by most accounts, like burnt rubber and cough syrup, and it was pulled from shelves within a few years. The strange ending is that it became a cult collector item, and people now pay silly money just to taste the most famous failure in Scotch. While they are darkening it, many distilleries are also stripping it. The process is called chill filtration. When whiskey drops below a certain strength, natural oils and fatty acids can make it turn cloudy if you add ice or a splash of water. That cloudiness is completely harmless and a sign the whiskey is untouched, but it alarms casual buyers, so producers chill the spirit right down and filter those compounds out for a clean, clear look. The catch is that those same oils carry flavour and body, the very texture serious drinkers prize. There is a simple tell here. Whiskey bottled at 46% or higher generally does not need filtering to stay clear, which is why the better bottlings proudly say non-chill filtered. A whiskey sitting at the legal minimum of 40% has very likely been polished for looks at the cost of mouthfeel. And the numbers themselves are being quietly hidden too. For years, the age statement was sacred, but when single malt demand exploded, distilleries ran short of mature stock. The fix was to drop the number entirely and release bottles with no age statement at all, dressed up with romantic names and grand stories instead. No age statement does not automatically mean bad whiskey, but it very often means young whiskey wearing a grown-up costume and carrying a grown-up price. If your shelf is starting to feel like a magic trick, good. We are only halfway down, and the deeper layers are where the real machinery lives. If you are finding this useful, subscribe so you do not miss the rest of the descent. It gets considerably darker from here. Now we reach the level the industry would really rather you did not see. The machinery behind the curtain. Let us talk about sherry casks, the most romantic words in whiskey. A bottle that says sherry cask matured conjures images of ancient Spanish cellars and barrels soaked in wine for a century. The reality is almost industrial. Back in the 1980s, Spain changed its law and banned shipping sherry abroad in barrels, and the supply of genuine old sherry casks dried up almost overnight. So the whiskey industry built a workaround. Today, most sherry casks are made to order. Brand new or refreshed barrels are filled with cheap sherry for as little as 6 months to 2 years, purely to season the wood, and then that sherry is poured straight back out. It is frequently not even good enough to drink. A lot of it ends its life as vinegar. These are not the precious century-old cellar casks people picture. The truly ancient barrels, the ones that sit in a Spanish solera soaking up wine for decades, are far too valuable and almost never leave. What your whiskey actually touched was a flavor delivery vessel built for one purpose: to make the spirit taste sherried. It got shadier still in the old days, when distilleries used a thick, concentrated wine syrup called paxarette, sprayed and pressurized straight into the wood to fake that rich sherry character. That trick was finally banned in 1990. The point stands. When you pay a premium for sherry cask whiskey, you are usually paying for a barrel that was seasoned to a recipe last year, not a relic from a Spanish dynasty. Then there is the strangest legal loophole in the entire business. It is called teaspooning. When a distillery sells barrels to an outside bottler but does not want its precious name appearing on a stranger's bottle, it drops a literal teaspoon of malt from a different distillery into the cask. That tiny addition changes nothing you could ever taste, but it legally turns the whiskey from a single malt into a blended malt, which means the original distillery name can no longer be used. So an entire shadow world of code names exists. Balvenie with a teaspoon of Glenfiddich in it gets sold as Burnside. Glenfiddich with a drop of Balvenie becomes Wardhead. Teaspooned Lafroy gets called Williamson. To anyone in the know, these names are a flashing sign that reads, "Here is a famous whiskey we are not allowed to name. The liquid is 99% unchanged. The whole ritual exists only to protect a brand and quietly lower the value of the barrel." You are looking at a multi-million-pound industry built on the legal power of a single teaspoon. This all feeds a hidden economy of cask brokers and independent bottlers, names like Gordon and MacPhail and Signatory, middlemen who trade barrels of unnamed whiskey like commodities. They buy casks the big distilleries quietly sell off, bottle them at full strength and natural colour, and very often deliver better whiskey than the official release. Most drinkers never know this layer exists. It is the plumbing underneath every bottle you have ever bought, and almost none of it appears in the advertising. It produces a strange situation where the very same spirit can sit on a shelf 3 times over under 3 different names at 3 different prices. The official distillery bottling, the independent bottler's version, and the teaspooned trade name all poured from sister casks filled on the same day at the same distillery. The label, the box, and the story are doing the heavy lifting. The whiskey underneath is often nearly identical. Take a breath. Because below the machinery, the water turns properly cold and dark. This is where Scotch stops being a craft and starts being a casino, and the next 2 layers are the ones that genuinely ruin people. If you want to see how far down this goes, this is the moment to subscribe. Below the machinery sits the money, and the money is where Scotch gets dangerous. To understand it, rewind to the 1980s. The industry had badly overproduced through the 1970s, demand collapsed, and Scotland was left drowning in whiskey nobody wanted. They called it the Whiskey Loch. The giant that controlled most of the industry responded by shutting distilleries down, and many were not just closed but bulldozed, gone forever. The roll call still reads like a graveyard. Banff, Glenugie, Glenmore, Milburn, Northport, and most painfully of all, Port Ellen, which fell silent in 1983. Brora went dark the same year. Rosebank closed not long after. At the time, these were treated as failures, surplus stock from second-rate sites nobody would miss. Here is the brutal irony. Those exact distilleries now produce some of the most worshipped and expensive whiskey on earth. A single cask of Ardbeg from that lean era reportedly changed hands for around £16 million, more than twice what the entire distillery had once been bought for. The bottles the industry threw in the bin became holy relics. Port Ellen and Brora have now been rebuilt at staggering cost, stone by stone, to chase the ghost of the whiskey they once destroyed. The same companies that killed those distilleries are now selling us their resurrection at a vast premium. That scarcity turned whiskey into an asset class, and that is where it gets ugly. The crown jewel is the Macallan 1926. 40 bottles were filled in 1986 after 60 years asleep in a single sherry cask. The original price was £5,000. In 2023, one of them sold at auction for over £2 million, roughly $2.7 million, the most ever paid for a bottle of spirit anywhere in the world. To show you how detached this market has become from reality, an empty display case for that same whiskey was bought on a second-hand website for £200 and later valued at well over £100,000. People are now collecting the cardboard. That same frenzy created an army of flippers. When a distillery puts out a hyped limited release at a set price, buyers snap up every bottle in minutes, not to drink but to relist the very same afternoon at double or triple the cost. Whole bottles change hands again and again, without anyone ever pulling the cork. The drink becomes a token, traded like a share certificate, and the people who actually want to taste it are priced out completely. A spirit invented to be enjoyed by a fireside is now, for an awful lot of people, a thing you are quietly forbidden from opening. When the numbers get that big, the predators arrive. In recent years, Scotch became the center of a wave of investment scams. Companies sprang up promising ordinary people they could buy a barrel of new whiskey, hold it while it aged, and earn returns of 12% a year, sometimes a promised 50% over time. A major broadcaster sent an undercover reporter deep into this world, and the findings were grim. Investors were sold casks that were wildly overpriced, casks that had been sold to several different people at once, and in plenty of cases, casks that simply did not exist. One woman put more than £100,000 into 4 barrels. 2 of them were never real. The man behind one of the biggest operations turned out to be a convicted fraudster who had already been found guilty of conning more than £6 million out of 350 people, now running the same play under a fake name. And here is the trap that makes it all possible. Whiskey casks are not classed as financial products, so the financial regulator does not police them at all. Those proud certificates of ownership hanging on victims' walls were, legally, worthless paper. Hundreds of people lost their life savings chasing the exact dream you were sold at the calm, comfortable top of this iceberg. We are nearly at the bottom now, in the black water where almost nobody goes. This is the abyss, and it forces a genuinely frightening question. How much of the rare whiskey in the world is even real? Start with the most famous case. In 2017, a wealthy collector walked into a hotel bar high in the Swiss Alps and paid nearly 10,000 Swiss francs, around £7,700, for a single glass poured from a bottle labelled Macallan 1878. It was hailed as the most expensive dram ever served. Then a few experts looked closer. The hotel, to its credit, sent the liquid away for forensic testing. Carbon dating at Oxford revealed the whiskey was not from 1878 at all. It had been distilled around 1970. Worse, the lab found it was not even a single malt, just a cheap blend of malt and grain. A pour supposedly worth a fortune was modern whiskey in an antique costume, and the hotel manager flew across the world to refund the buyer in person. You might hope that was a freak one-off. It was not. A team of scientists at a Scottish research centre took 55 bottles of rare collectible Scotch bought on the open secondary market and carbon dated every single one. The method is clever. Nuclear weapons testing in the 1950s left a permanent fingerprint of radiocarbon in the atmosphere, so any barley grown after that era carries a tell that no forger can fake. Of those 55 bottles, 21 were outright fakes or not distilled in the year on the label. That is well over a third. The same researchers estimated that as many as 40% of all rare vintage bottles changing hands in the world could be counterfeit. One entire private collection worth more than £50,000 was found to be fraudulent from top to bottom. The detail that should truly unsettle you is this. Even Macallan itself, years ago, bought back bottles of its own supposed 19th century whiskey to fill out its archive, and later discovered a number of them were fakes. If the most valuable name in the business cannot reliably tell its own genuine bottles from forgeries, what chance does an ordinary collector have at a busy auction? And that leads to the quiet horror at the very bottom of the iceberg, the thing the auction world does not say out loud. A huge share of the trophy bottles sitting in private collections and changing hands for fortunes have never been tested, and a great many of them never will be. Because the only way to prove a bottle is genuine is to open it, sample it, and risk discovering it is worthless. Nobody wants to be the person who shatters the value of their own treasure. So the fakes stay sealed, stay celebrated, and keep trading at ever higher prices, propped up by a market that has quietly decided it would rather not look too closely. That is the full descent. At the top, a pretty bottle with an age and a price. At the bottom, a darkened, filtered, teaspooned, made-to-order spirit, sometimes sold by scammers, sometimes worth a fortune, and sometimes not even the whiskey it claims to be. None of this means Scotch is a con, and it does not mean you should stop drinking it. The vast majority of what ends up in your glass is honest, well-made, and worth every penny. But almost everything you are charged extra for sits somewhere on this iceberg. The colour, the age of the cask, the heritage, the rarity, the story. You are very often paying for the legend far more than the liquid. The smartest thing you can do is exactly what the people at the very bottom of this iceberg learned the hard way. Stop trusting the label and start trusting your own glass. If this changed the way you see the bottle on your shelf, subscribe, and we will go even deeper next time.